Next one is, I went with one herbaceous plant. Pip can keep coming down around this way if you want. We're gonna, after I talk about this, we're gonna keep going this way. This is a little Narcissus fernandezii, from the Iberian Peninsula, so Spain and Portugal. You see it growing around there. Really cute little plant, great for smaller gardens, great for kind of massing and naturalizing in you know, as a understory. These little shrubs, these little bulbs that come up really early, they'll also go dormant pretty early, and they're great plants for planting under butterfly bush and other cutback shrubs. You know, you have a Lespedeza here. Really, these could have been planted right around that Lespedeza. They'll come up, they'll flower, they'll photosynthesize. The Lespedeza will start coming out. By the time it's leafed out, these are turning brown and starting to go dormant, and you don't have to worry about cleanup or anything because they'll just be covered up by the cutback shrub. Really, probably a more effective use for something like this than just leaving it out in the open. So it's a good way to use these small bulbs. This one's really nice. Got these kind of little shallow cups, pretty wide outward facing flowers. Some of these little dwarf guys really hang down and don't show their face so well. These do well. Typically they'll have 2 to 4 or 5 flowers come out from each stalk. Nice little grassy foliage. Looks almost kind of like an onion with foliage. Just a really nice, easy plant. Some of these dwarf bulbs can be tricky, but these, as long as you give them sun, relatively well-drained soil, they'll do just fine. They'll do acid, alkaline soils. They grow on alkaline soils, but they like our acid soils as well. Really a cute little plant. You can get them from specialty bulb growers. I think this was from Brent and Becky's bulbs up in Gloucester, Virginia. Questions or thoughts?
Can you pass it around so we can smell it?
Yeah. I don't know, you know, without...
How do you got that?
Pardon? Oh, right up here, this patch.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that was almost 50 bulbs that were all put in one spot. Thank you for mentioning that. They are fragrant flowers. It's a little bit better on a sunny day. You know, it's been cool this morning. You don't get as much of that fragrance, but they will. It does kind of waft around when it's on a sunny day, that fragrance.
It says 2011, so they were planted in 2011?
They were planted in January of 2011, yes. And you will notice on this list as we go farther, there are a lot of the Magnolias with no date or anything on there. That's because JC was not always the best at record keeping, and some things we don't know when they were planted, but they're pre-96. I can say that for sure. Okay, next one on the list is a Magnolia Spectrum, and I put this on here for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of what I'm talking about are smaller Magnolias, and this is a nice big one, as you can see. This is one from that came out of the National Arboretum, and that's the other reason I want to talk about it, because right now with all the talk about the economy and, you know, the government and nobody doing anything, it's kind of nice to talk about something that our government paid for that's so wonderful, like a magnolia. This was bred by William Kozar with the National Arboretum and Germplasm Resource Unit. It's a large tree. Obviously, it'll keep getting bigger. Really deep flowers. It's just starting to come into flower. You got to come out and see this in another couple weeks, say for the Magnolia Symposium, because it will be absolutely gorgeous when it's in full flower. It's a hybrid between really two of my favorite old magnolias. Magnolia liliflora nigra, which now everybody is trying to breed these really dark flowered magnolias. If you put them out in the field, Magnolia nigra is almost always about the darkest out there, and it's a real old one, and you don't see it in the trade nearly as often as you should, because it's still better than most of the other ones out there. And the other parent is Magnolia sprengeri, what used to be called the cultivar diva, but has now become its variety or subspecies diva, and that's the pink or red flowering form of Magnolia sprengeri, and it is a wild variety. Both fantastic plants. Has anybody ever been to San Francisco Botanic Garden? If you've been there in the spring, they have simply massive Magnolia Springeri, including Diva, and they are, I mean, that's a, you know, come to Jesus experience right there, because it is, man, it is, they're spectacular. So you take these two wonderful plants with deep color flowers, you cross them. One is a small plant, one's a large plant. You get kind of a medium-large plant with really, really deep flowers, heavy flower. It's a really good plant. It's hard to find some of these USDA introductions now, but Spectrum's one to look for.
Thanks.
This is kind of a plant that even real plant nuts seem to not know very well. It's a cherry, it's a prunus. It's called Prunus jackmontii, the Afghan bush cherry. Real showy little shrubby plant, small tree. You can limb it up like a small tree. It's kind of nice that way. Or you can let it grow as a shrubby plant. And it just covers itself in flowers. You can see it. A little bit, perhaps a little washed out color, but part of that's because it starts so early and then just keeps going. And by the time these last flowers on the tips of the branches open up, it'll just be solid pink. Really a nice little plant. Very, very tough. You know, it'll survive drought. It'll survive blazing sun. Doesn't want to sit in water. Doesn't want to be in dense shade. Survive, I don't know, the Taliban in Afghanistan, I guess. Can't ask for much more than that. It does get lots of fruit. It'll get little red fruits all along there. It's a prunus. Presumably they are edible, if not palatable. I have never actually tried one. I've never seen birds eating them either. They seem to hang on a long time. You know, you'd think birds would move around, but I've never seen this seeding around the garden at all. It will occasionally, you'll get a seedling right underneath there, which leads me to believe the birds are not moving it around. Usually gets pretty good yellow fall color, which is different for a lot of the flowering shrubs. You don't get much in the way of the fall color, but this one's pretty nice, and really a very early plant. Hardy up into the mountains and all the way down into Alabama. I know somebody down there who's got one that's probably about 50 years old now, still doing great. Doesn't get all those diseases that prunus seems to get, the other cherries. So really a nice plant. Questions?
Is this typical of its size? Is about 6 feet or?
Yeah, I mean most of the literature will tell you that it only gets about 4 or 5 feet. It gets larger than that. Without being touched or anything, it'll grow to 8 feet and 8 feet tall and 10 feet wide if you let it. But after it finishes flowering, if you want to cut it back, you can trim it back, and you can see the flowers on this season's growth. So if you cut it back, as long as you don't go too hard, you'll still get the flowers again next year. It'll have plenty of time to push out new growth and set new buds.
Will it go in zone 5?
Yeah. Shouldn't have problems in 5. It'll be much later flowering, but yeah, it should be fine. All right, before we get started, before I talk about this, there's something I forgot to mention up front. Next month's Plantsmen's tour on the 8th. Special treat. Our newest employee, Lizzie Lathers, is going to be leading that tour. So you definitely want to be here for that. Have lots of questions. Put her on the spot.
What is the subject?
What is the subject? I think her title is something like "You're not in Wisconsin anymore." Transplanted, something about a transplanted gardener from Zone 4.
Everything that's new to her.
Yeah, so that's everything here. So yeah, it should be a fun talk. And if you haven't met Lizzie, you got to meet her because she's wonderful. She's quite a bundle of energy. Okay, the next one is Magnolias soulangeana coats. This is another fairly old selection. For saucer magnolias, it's a pretty nice color. Some of the saucer magnolias, the outsides kind of go from pink to white, which can be nice, but these have the solid pink petals, the back sides of the petals. Inside, it's a pretty nice white. There aren't a lot of plants that do that, but some do. Coats is also nice because if you look inside, the stamens and the pistils are all a really nice pink inside as well, which you have to get up close to really appreciate that. But You know, this is the time of year when you really want to get out and start experiencing things close up, and it's a little bit before everything explodes. I want to mention with coats and some of these other ones I'm going to be talking about, some of these older ones like Verbanica and Speciosa and some of these that I'm going to be talking about. If you look through the old literature, they talk about these being late Magnolias. And you can see we have a lot, well, you may not even be able to know, we have a lot of Magnolias around here. A lot of them are just getting started. And these late ones are some of the early ones for us. And that's because breeding, more current breeding, has really been breeding for later and later flowering, because so often what you get are the flowers knocked back. So the breeding has been to push it back, and push it back, and push it back, because plants like Magnolias solangiana, they're really fairly one-seasonal plants. They are gorgeous when they flower, but they're a little nondescript otherwise. So if they get hit by a freeze and you lose all the flowers, you know, once out every 3 years, not a whole lot of reason to grow them. One of my very favorite stories about plants was when I first met Pamela Harper. Do y'all know Pamela Harper, the photographer and garden writer? She's a wonderful, wonderful woman, British woman who's lived in Virginia for many years. And her husband had just died within the past year, but maybe even 6 or 8 months. And she was devoted to her husband. They were very, very, very close couple, and they had been married for, I don't know, 40 years, 50 years, something like that. And we had gotten to talking about plants, and it was springtime, and Magnolias were coming out, and I said something about how much I liked them, and she said, my husband just loved saucer magnolias. We had a great big saucer magnolia in the turnaround to our driveway. If you ever get the chance to go see her garden, that's kind of one of the high points, is that turnaround in her driveway. It's gorgeous. She said, we had it, it was there, it was kind of anchored the garden, it was the biggest thing there, and he just loved it. When it flowered, he'd rave and rave and rave, and he just loved that plant. So, but it really only flowered 1 out of every 2 or 3 years with the frost, so I had it cut down. And I thought, there is a gardener. I mean, that is hardcore gardening. And she said, if it doesn't pull its weight, it's got to go. So once her husband was out of the picture, she's getting rid of that tree, and that's some of us are a little more sentimental about our plants, but I thought that was great. But if you have space, they are wonderful plants, even because they are so spectacular when they flower. Most of these are just getting going, so you don't get a real good appreciation for how showy they can be. One of the nice things about coats, it's a little bit large for the solangiana types, but it tends to be a pretty upright plant, which is nice for these. A lot of these will be much more widespreading, and these go up. So if you want to plant it near a driveway or a pathway, it's a pretty good choice for that. Questions?
Is this the typical size? It's about 30 feet by...
Yeah, I'm terrible size. 30 feet by 12 or 15. That's probably pretty typical. Plants keep growing. They're not like people. They don't, they'll keep getting a little bit larger. But as they get older and older, the new growth is less and less. So instead of putting out 1.5 feet like they may when they're young, they'll put out 4 inches as they mature.
Do you know if these will also do in the coast of North Carolina?
Oh yeah, they'll do very well on the coast. In fact, the kind of the moderating temperatures of the coast are pretty nice for magnolias, because you don't get those quick drops that you get in the interior so much because of the ocean there. So it warms up a little slower in the spring often, but it doesn't drop as cold. It doesn't drop as quickly if it gets cold. And these are used as street trees all through Alabama and Louisiana and places like that. There's not a lot of information in the literature about green mist. It's definitely got stellata and or Magnolia X Lebneri in its background. It's, I believe, a Duncan and Davies introduction. Really nice white flowers, a fair number of petals and pretty thick textured petals. If you're like me and you pet your plants pretty often, this is a much thicker textured petal than typical Magnolia stellata, but in other senses looks a lot like stellata. Not sure where they came up with the name. My assumption is this tends to have more green on the pistil inside. If you look in there in the middle, you'll see some green in the center of the flowers, more than most stellatas have. But it's a very reliable plant when you can find it in the trade. It's a good size for smaller landscapes. You can see this one's been here for quite a while and it has not gotten too large. Flowers very heavily. One thing I've noticed about this, never seen it in the literature, but one thing I've noticed about green mist is you'll get, it tends to open up a lot of the flowers kind of at once, but then it keeps a lot of them pretty tight. Some kind of open up everything all at once. Some of the Magnolias will kind of space them out, and they'll start and kind of work up to a peak and then work back down. This one tends to get a pretty good flowering, and then as those are fading, you get a second pretty good flowering, which is usually after most frosts. So you usually get some pretty good flowers out of this, even if they get hit hard. But it doesn't kind of space them out so much. I don't think it has any fragrance. Well, I was wrong. I can actually smell this. It's actually got a wonderful fragrance to it. But really a nice plant out of New Zealand is where it was bred. Question: New Zealand has they do a lot of work with magnolias and camellias and other plants.
Native to Asia originally.
Yeah, native to Asia originally.
Are these, Mark, are these flower buds or are these vegetative?
Most of the smaller ones are vegetative. Yeah, if you look up, you'll see some of the flower buds that haven't started going yet.
We must have had it a long time, because that copper label on it was one of the early labels from the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, it's a lot of these magnolias I'm showing are lost to antiquity in there. Does this have a date on it? Let's see. Yeah, no date. We got a lot of these. We must have gotten a large shipment, probably all at once, from Goslar Farms, who still does wonderful magnolias out of the Pacific Northwest. And we got a lot of these that I'm talking about came from Goslar Farms. Solangiana. This is one called Speciosa as a cultivar. You can tell it's an old plant because you wouldn't be able to, anything after 1959, you wouldn't be able to have a Latinized cultivar name like Speciosa. This has been distributed occasionally in the trade as late Speciosa. Again, nowadays you wouldn't think of this as terribly late, as there are a lot of more later magnolias, but it is really just getting started now. I had somebody, actually when I was out here looking at these earlier, somebody came by and asked if this had gotten hit by frost, and they were looking at all these buds, and what it is the buds are just opening and they still have the little fuzzy bud scales all on there. So in another week, these will open up, we'll drop these little bud scales, they'll open up and you'll get that nice kind of creamy white flower. And side by side, you can really see the difference in flower color on these. The green mist is a really pretty close to pure white, whereas Speciosa is more of a cream color. And again, if you're into feeling your plants, you can feel how thick textured these petals are in comparison. Makes a little bit larger plant. This is one I think from the early to mid 1800s. Out of France and Belgium, if I remember correctly. But really heavy flower. Unlike this one, it'll really boom, all of them all at once pretty much. Just getting started on that, and again, in another week, it'll just be absolutely covered. And it is delightfully fragrant as well. When you have bad sense of smell, you just don't think about that too much. Questions about this?
Size on it again, typical, or?
Well, these were planted back probably late 80s, early 90s. So these are mature height. Usually when you see a height, they're telling you 20 years. So it's this height. I'll stand now. I'm 6.5 feet tall, so it's 18 feet. You know, 15 to 20 feet, and that's pretty typical for most Solangienas, is 15 to 25 maybe. A lot of the Solangienas will have more pink. You can see some of the growth that's just opening up. You'll see a little pink stripe on the outside, but as these open, it loses that. You just have a little bit of pink right in there at the base. Other questions?
Generally, for magnolias, what hardiness zone?
Well, it varies depending on the species and the hybrid, but in general, magnolias will grow pretty far north. You can get them, you know, zone 6, zone 5, pretty reliably. And really, as opposed to us, a lot of the magnolias, not all the Solangienas, I wouldn't go necessarily to zone 5 with those, but a lot of the Solangienas will stay dormant until it warms up. And so if you're in a climate where it's up and down, they'll often open up and get zapped if you're where it's cold. They'll often do that here. If you live in a place where it stays cold until spring and then it gets warm, a lot of these magnolias will be spectacular every year. Whereas for us, it really is iffy. If you get, you know, if we get a hard frost in mid to late March, these flowers will turn brown. That's why we breed for later flowering, ones that need more of those, more chilling before they open up. Magnolia stellata. This is one called Ballerina. It was selected for, you know, a good white color and then lots of petals. It's got usually about 30 or so petals, so pretty full, semi-double-ish flower on it. There are a lot of selections of Magnolia stellata out there, ranging from white to pink. Ballerina is one of my favorites for those narrow petals and lots of them. Another one that I didn't put on the list, but for just pure white, is Centennial or Centennial Spirit. Is probably about my favorite for a really good, clean, white flowered magnolia. Ballerina's been in the trade for a long time. It opens up with a little bit of pink on the outside of the petals, and you can kind of see that on the backs of some of the ones that are just starting to open. You can see it's got kind of that pink striping on the back, and you can find that in a lot of them. Many of the true stellatas tend to be smaller plants, more large shrubs than trees in many cases. This is a very old one, very good size. Centennial that I mentioned does tend to be larger than some of the other ones. Probably the most popular one is Royal Star, which tends to be a little bit smaller, but all good plants. Like all magnolias, or most magnolias, they're going to do best in more sun. They want moist, well-drained soil in sun. You can get the best flowering. Almost all of them will grow pretty well in shade, but they will be thin, they'll stretch, and you won't get very good flowering in the shade. So they really want to be sunny plants. Also, magnolias in here. This is one with lots of flowers, so people can get up and look at it. They're very primitive flowers. They're one of the first relatives of the first flowering plants around. And so if you kind of look at the sexual organs in there, the stamens and pistils, they're not very delicate. They're not very finely formed. As you get into the more and more further advanced plants, you see kind of more specialization. And if you've ever been out in the garden when a Magnolia grandiflora is flowering in the evening, and they have those great big cup-shaped flowers and great big sex organs in there, and they're really designed for great big old beetles and things to come smacking through there. You know, if you watch the nature channels and they have these specialized flowers where the insect lands right here and it opens something up and it goes inside and it gets all the pollen on it and it distributes pollen, and then it has to actually fertilize the plant before it'll open up another spot and get out these really highly evolved co-relatives. That's not this. This is made for something to come slapping in there, you know, one of those great big bugs you see in dioramas at natural history museums and things like that. Really a primitive kind of thing, but apparently they work. It's also the reason why there are so many selections of magnolia, because if a big old fat beetle can get in there and bring pollen from one to the other pretty easily, guess what? It's pretty darn easy for novice breeders to get in there and move pollen from one plant onto another plant and cross-pollinate, grow out seeds. The seeds grow pretty easily from most magnolias, so it's a really pretty easy process. So if you have more room than you need for crossing your hostas or something like that, you can cross magnolias and line them out in your fields and see a lot of them. And I will mention on our Magnolia tour, the Friday pre-tour before the symposium, Tom Kranitsky, who has been doing this for a long time. I don't know if I'd call him a novice anymore, but certainly amateur. He's not really being paid to do it at this point, so he's not a professional. But he's done a lot of that on property, so it's really neat to go out and see all the seedlings coming into flower and really be able to evaluate what's worthy and what isn't. So just a little bit about magnolia flowering. And any questions about this plant or magnolias in general? Breeding? Anybody want to get in there and start breeding?
I know this one is not on your list, but is it beautiful when it all blooms?
Yes, yeah.
Like anticipation of what's coming.
They're all beautiful when they start blooming. But yeah, that's nice big kind of fat petaled flowers on there, which are very nice.
The height on this one is just
This is a pretty good old tall one. This is mature height.
I was wondering, is it cut down because of the way it's growing at the base here, where you have the multiple trunks?
No, the stellatas will tend to grow as multiple trunks. You rarely see stellatas grown as single trunks. Occasionally you do, and you see it more often at nurseries now. The stellatas grown as single trunks, kind of grown up, staked up, and with a nice head. But typically, traditionally, they're grown multi-stemmed, so this is pretty typical.
So is this a larger one than the last one we looked at, the speciosa, when it spreads out?
No, this will tend to be smaller than the speciosa. Verbanica is another old one. This one's from France, and apparently Verbanica is the French for verbena. So it's very old, 1800s, but a really heavy blooming one, and one I kind of wanted to do because it's got those larger petals, kind of like Spectrum, that first one from the U.S. National Arboretum that I showed. A little different from all the Solangianas and Stellatas. What's interesting about Verbanica is the outside is really a nice deep rose, and then inside is pure white, kind of like the coats that I showed you. This plant is this is one of the more popular ones. If you go to any old collection of magnolias, they almost always have Verbanica. It's still available in the trade fairly often, but not continuously. Very stout plant. It is taller than the stellatas. Most of the stellatas and solangianas that we've talked about will tend to be a little more upright, much coarser than the stellata types, which had the finer branching. This is really coarse. I actually really like these coarser magnolias in the winter. I think they're really attractive during that period. Tight head. The flowers will all open up just about at once. When it flowers, it doesn't get hit by frost. There are a few plants that are more spectacular than Verbanica. You get the real nice deep rose going up to pink on the top, the whites on the inside, and it'll cover it. And it's, some magnolias can get a little rangy in terms of habit. This one always stays really a nice shape. Questions about it?
Are you saying this doesn't get hit because it's lighter or because it's resistant?
No, oh no. I said when it doesn't get hit. Oh no. This one when it frosts, this one gets hit hard. This one, it's usually all or nothing. You either get it beautiful or you get absolutely, you know, nothing. So if the temperatures drop a little colder than we think on, what was it, Wednesday, Thursday, the temperature's supposed to go down, it'll fry every one of these buds. But, you know, if you have the space, it's worth it. Perhaps not if you don't have the space. It is beautiful. And all winter you have this one has those really fat, fuzzy terminal buds, which are fun if you have kids. You know, they're like petting mice out there when they're The last one is a stellata. This is the one that whenever people ask me for a photo of a magnolia, you know, flower from the collection, I almost always send them a picture of this flower. When the Magnolia Society Journal wanted a picture, this is the one I sent. They got a little beat up from the rain, but it's Magnolia stellata chrysanthemumiflora, which I also like saying that name, chrysanthemumiflora. Seems like there's an extra syllable in there. Very, very doubled flower. It goes up to 40 or 50 petals on there, so it's a really full flower. And when it's all going, it's quite spectacular. Really nice pink. Opens up from deep pink, but even the inside is kind of pale pink, not that pure white you get with some. Real small, kind of a small statured, round-headed plant. And you can see what I was talking about, the difference between like a stellata that wants to be multi-stemmed and some of the other hybrids, these coarser full branched hybrids that want to be a single trunk unless they sucker from the base. There are wild populations of pink Magnolia stellata in Japan. The kind of widespread areas. The pink form is pretty rare in Japan, and it's under a lot of developmental pressure. But the Japanese are trying to protect those native stands. So that's where most of the pink flower forms come from those type of forms. And there are some that are really, really deep pink, not bright pink, but deep pale pink. Can you say that? Deep pale pink? Well, yeah, you get what I'm saying, or you don't. Either way, they're very light, kind of almost just more like this, kind of just blush pink flowers. So there's kind of a wide range in the pinks, and then going into the pure whites. But I don't know of any stellatas that are really fuller than these when they're in flower. They have more than 50 petals per flower on them, like this can. So really a pretty showy plant. Questions? Thoughts? Next time we do the Magnolia tour, it'll be kind of the bigger flowered Magnolias. This one I went with most of the smaller flowered ones. And if you come in 2 weeks, they'll really be popping. These all around us are Magnolias, and so you can see that there are a lot that just haven't even really started yet. So it'll be spectacular over the next couple of weeks. So hope y'all.
These that are heavily budded and not open yet, they'll make it when you get that cold.
Yeah, if they're still covered with the fuzzy buds, no problems at all. If they're starting to split, they're generally okay. Some of those that have already dropped those buds and you can see, you know, the full color, they may get damaged. Outside petals will get damaged. It's really one of the nice things about some of the pink ones. You know, when a magnolia flower gets damaged, it goes brown, and that kind of gets hidden with the pink a little bit. If you have that really pure white, it shows up even if it's just a handful. But
are these easy to find, to buy?
Magnolias?
This one.
This one? Yeah, this is in the trade. It's not, these older ones are not widely available. You know, the new is always the mantra. And but some of these old-fashioned ones, chrysanthemumiflora is definitely available. You know, I would check locally, if not there, mail order. But a lot of local places will have them.
What's a good local place?
Well, we get plants from all over the place. Technically, I'm not supposed to recommend one place over the other, but we get plants from, you know, from Camellia Forest and from woody plants, Camellia Forest. Get them from Homewood, Logan's, Fairview. All the independent garden centers have really great selections. This time of year, it's hard to put in requests and get plants. But if you go to them during the early winter, late fall, early winter, and put in requests, and you're okay with them not getting them until the spring, you know, they'll go out of their way to find plants for you. And you know, if you want Chrysanthemum flora or Verbanica, you know, they'll try and track it down, and you know, they'll order 2 or 3, get you one, and hopefully sell the other ones to other people. They're all plant. I always say this: they're all plant lovers. There's a reason they went into it. You know, it wasn't for the big bucks. You don't go into garden centers for the big bucks. So they only want to sell, but they can only, you know, make a living selling what sells. So you know, they most of them would rather not sell a million different, you know, a million Japanese hollies. They'd rather sell a million something else. So if you put in requests, they'll try and track them down for you. And if they have questions about, if you see something here and your local garden center says, well, I don't know anything about it, can you tell me about it? Send them on to us, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions they might have, and tell them if it really is worth ordering, you know, 5, or if they should just get the one for you. Other questions? Other spring-related questions, if not Magnolias? Oh, I got one more?
1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute. Oh. No, that's my wife.
So we got you ignoring her on film now.
She'll be devastated when she watches my tour online, I'm sure.
Well, we'll have to forward it to her to make sure she sees it.
Yeah, yes.
How are all the hollies cut on the border?
Oh, yeah, good question. Why were all the hollies cut on the border? Because they were too tall. If we could have gotten them all down, we would have done it, but it's just too much. We couldn't get it all done, so we're going to do it in sections. They were shading things out. They were, you know, we want a hedge there, but we don't want a 35-foot tall, 20-foot wide wall there. Yeah, that's a waste of space as far as we're concerned. So we're actually going to be putting in some different plants there. Ultimately, ultimately those will come out, and we'll put in a whole different hedge.
That is the proper way to prune Nellie Stevens, right?
That's right. Hollies, you can really. Hollies are one of the few plants that you can really do hard like that and have them recover just fine. Especially if you're talking about as a hedge. Really, a lot of people would say if you've got trunks that big around, go ahead and cut them all the way to the ground and let them resprout from the base.
Well, I'm glad you're saying that, because that's what my husband did with the hollies at home. I said, they are not going to come back.
Oh, they'll come back just fine.
Okay.
Now try getting rid of them. That's a little more difficult.
Mark, I know you're on it. Did this really get hit hard? It looks like, you know, these are still closed, but come right on. Some of them.
Yeah. This is a Magnolia denudata, and it's called the Yulon magnolia, and it tends to be one of the more bud sensitive. It opens up very early, and will often get hit. This is one that will get hit even in bud, and you can see, yeah, these buds are all dead. You break them open, they're just black inside. So we're going to get pretty much nothing on this, and you know, it hadn't even been that cold. So when Magnolia denudata, which again is one of the very first ones to open, when it opens, it's beautiful, and when this one, Forest Pink, opens up, it is something else. But one out of every 4 or 5 years, probably. Other questions? All right. Well, I'm glad you came out. Remember, make sure to come in next month on the 8th. I think 8th, 9th, something like that, for Lizzie's talk, because it should be a lot of fun.
Well, thanks for a great tour, Mark.
My pleasure. Hope to see y'all in weekend after next. Talk to Chris about registration if you are interested, because it's going to be good. And we will have a auction with our symposium if you want to get some really good Magnolias.